Okay, good morning, grade fours. This is lesson 5, week 11, the 29th of March. So this will be the last lesson. So I will go slowly through lesson 5. It's in your student book, page 134 to page 139. So we're in a student book, page 134 to page 139. So I will do this lesson, then I will do the activity lesson next. Okay, so let's go through the lesson. So as you can see on the screen, there's page 134. Okay, now this lesson is about the inventors. Okay, the inventors and their inventions. So there's about there in this they talk about 6 inventors. So let's talk about the first one. Let's look on page 134. Page 134, they talk about uh, Taqiyuddin or Taqiyuddin. He was a Muslim who lived in the Ottoman state, and his profession was he was a judge, he was a philosopher, he was an inventor, and was a teacher. So he was very clever. He was a judge, philosopher, inventor, and a teacher. And what did he invent? He invented clocks and cameras. Also, he invented in the early 1500s, he invented the steam turbine. So Taqiyuddin, he was Muslim. He lived in the Ottoman state. In the 1500s, his occupation, he was a judge, he was a philosopher, he was an inventor, and he was a teacher. And what did he invent? He invented uh, the clock and the camera. Also, he invented in the early 1500s, he invented the steam turbine. The next person we talk about is Charles Babbage. Charles Babbage or Babbage. He was an Englishman. His occupation, he was a mathematician, a philosopher, and he was an inventor. Now, he's the first one who came up with the computer and the computer programs. Okay, so that he was the first person. Charles Babbage. He was an Englishman. He came from England. His occupation, he was a mathematician, he was a philosopher, he was an inventor, and he was the first one who came up with the idea of a computer and how to run computer programs. So that was the first two inventors. Let's go to page 35. Now page 135 in your student book. The next person we're going to talk about is James Watt. He was a Scottishman coming from Scotland. His occupation was he was an engineer and inventor. He was famous for inventing the first steam engine. So James Watt, okay, he was an inventor, he was an engineer, he was famous in the 1700s to invent the first steam engine. That was James Watt. The next person we're going to talk about is Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison was an American. His job, he was an inventor, and he was the first person to develop the electric light bulb that we use in today in our rooms, school, in factories. Of the device, the electric light bulb, that was Thomas Edison. So he came from America and invented the electric light bulb. That's Thomas Edison. The next person we're going to talk about is Alexander Graham Bell. He was also from England. He was an inventor, and he was the first person who invented early telephone. Okay, Alexander Graham Bell from England. He was the first person who invented early telephone. The next person we can talk about is Carl Friedrich Benz. He came from Germany and he was the first person to invent a car, the Mercedes Benz. Okay, so his name was Carl Friedrich Benz. He was a German, he came from Germany, and he was the first person who invented the early car, the Mercedes Benz. Okay, the last person we're going to talk about is Ray Tomlinson. In 1971, he was the first person who invented the email that we use today. He was the first person who invented the email. So that was Ray Tomlinson. The internet was later developed by by a lot of scientists who worked together. So, but he was the first person who invented the email system in 1971. Later, the internet was developed by a group of American scientists. Okay, so let's go quickly through again. Page 134, it was Tequilin. He was a Muslim. He lived in the Ottoman state. He was very clever. He studied science. He was a judge. He was a philosopher. He was an inventor. He was a teacher, and he was a person. He was the first person to invent the clock and the camera. He's also the first person in the 1500s that invented the steam turbine. That was Tiquidin, a Muslim. The next person was Charles Babbage. He was an Englishman. He was a mathematician. He was a philosopher and inventor. He was the first person who came up with the idea of a computer and a computer program. The third person we talk about is James Watt on page 135. He was a Scottish person. He came from Scotland. He was an engineer and an inventor. He was the first person to invent the steam engine in the 1700s, James Watt. The next person is Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison was the first person. He was an American. He was the first person to invent the electric light bulb. Okay, that's Thomas Edison. The next person we can talk about, the fifth person is Alexander Graham Bell from England. He was the first person who invented the early telephone. The next person we can talk about is Carl Friedrich Benz. He invented the early Mercedes-Benz, the first early car, the Mercedes-Benz. Okay, that's Carl Friedrich Benz. The last person we're going to talk about is Ray Tomlinson. He invented the email system in 1971. And later the internet was developed by a group of American scientists. Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 persons we talk about now. Okay, so page 134 and page 135 talk about the different inventors. Now let's go to page 136. Page 136. Now page 136, they just talk about what a patent is. Okay, now a patent is a license giving to someone permission to identify themselves as an inventor. It means if that person invent that product or that item, he got a patent, and that was called a patent. It was a license giving to someone permission to identify himself as the inventor of that particular item. So the word you must remember there is patent, okay, on page 136. It's a license given to someone permission to identify himself as the inventor and who discovered that particular item, okay? And we talk about the 7 inventors. So there they have a picture of Alexander Graham Bell. He was the first person who got a patent for uh, the early telephone. Let's go to page 137. Page 137, where there they talk about just the technological development in Saudi Arabia. Now there they just talk about, you can see the picture there on page 137, they just talk about the fossil fuels. Now Saudi Arabia is uh, indicative of the fossil fuels, or very famous for their fossil fuels. So it means petroleum, gas, natural gas, oil. Now you can see the need for fossil fuels were very important, and who are dependent on the fossil fuel. The world is very dependent on the fossil fuels, oil, and there you can see the early steam engine. You can see the bus there, see the cars, trucks. There's an aeroplane. Okay, so you can see the all that transport need oil, and that comes from fossil fuels, petroleum. Um, it comes from petroleum, the fossil fuel petroleum. Okay, so it's the petroleum. It means the fossil fuels were petroleum and oil. Okay, and the pictures just show you who actually needed all the transport modes that needed and the products that benefit from the fossil fuels. Okay, and they just show you the oil fuels technology. That's page 137. Okay, page 138. There they just talk about energy, the energy in the future. What will be used in the future? Um, Saudi Arabia is, or the Middle East, reserve, have very much oil reserves, but it will not last forever. And there you can see the human population uses about 87 million barrels of oil every day. So that's a lot of oil that the world uses every day, 87 million barrels of oil. So the oil reserves will not last. So we must look at other forms of energy. So the other forms of energy in the future will be the sun. So the sunshine is a renewable resource, and from that we get solar power. Okay, so from the sun we get it's a renewable resource. We get solar power for all kinds of machine. Then we can get energy from the wind, and they will establish wind turbines that will collect wind energy and convert it into power. So the wind turbines collect wind energy and convert it into power. There you can see the picture of the wind turbines. Okay. They also use the waves of the ocean to harness power, and also deep underneath the earth, they also will get some power, source of power underneath the surface of the earth to get some energy. So the four forms of energy in the future will be the sun, and they will use the sun for solar power, and the wind for wind turbines. The wind turbines will collect wind energy and convert it into power, and the waves of the ocean they always use to harness power, and they also research ways to deep under the earth for power. Okay, so that's the four sources of energy in the future. That's on page 138. On page 139, it's just a recap of all the lessons we did, the 5 lessons. Okay, so there's about 6 bullets. You can read it through, and this is just a recap of all the 5 lessons. So I will just read it for you. Oil and gas are fossil fuels formed over millions of years. Like water, they are resources we need to conserve. So we must need to conserve water. The Middle East suffers from a lack of water. So desolation helps to provide water. So desolation sites from the sea Then the third bullet, we talk about natural resources. To meet our need, the most important resource in our region are oil and gas. Millions of people work in these industries. Saudi Arabia provides much of the world's oil. The enterprise system is a system where people trade goods and services for money. So Saudi Arabia have a free enterprise system where people work and give their service for money. And transport and communication have changed the ways we live today, from the past to now. And they just talk about is renewable energy, the sources of renewable energy we will look at, because the oil reserve will not last. Okay, so that's just a recap of all the 5 lessons that we did. Okay, so that is the lesson, guys. The next lesson will be activity. I will explain the activity. Keep well, keep safe, and see you again in the activity lesson. Thank you.